The boardroom lights were already dimmed when I opened the door. 12 heads turned at once, some startled, others visibly annoyed. I wasn't supposed to be there. The calendar invite had mysteriously gone missing from my inbox. Again. Julian was mid-sentence when I entered laser pointer in-hand voice dripping with charm. She's just dead weight. Optics, nothing more. A few chuckles followed. A tight smirk from Ava. A barely suppressed snort from Carter. Even Mark, who used to share office snacks with me during late nights, looked away. None of them expected me to hear it. Or maybe they didn't care if I did. I stood there, silent, not blinking. Then I smiled. It wasn't a smile of weakness. It wasn't the grin of someone caught off guard or embarrassed. It was quiet, sharp, knowing. Because 5 hours earlier, while these people were sipping overpriced coffee and rewriting PowerPoints, I had built, I'd received confirmation, Orilight Holdings now owned Velmont Technologies. And Velmont owned Arginvest, Aurelius Capital's biggest account. I moved through the room slowly, deliberately, ignoring the lone empty chair they'd left near the coffee station, like a courtesy grave. No one offered me a seat. I didn't take one. Instead, I scanned the screen behind Julian, a bar graph I'd constructed last week, reshaped and relabeled with his initials on the footer. His voice carried on like I wasn't there. I let it happen. There was a strange power in invisibility, especially when it's temporary, especially when you're the only one in the room who knows the walls are about to collapse. No one noticed when I slipped back out the door, clicking shut behind me. I didn't need to sit in that room to know how it would end. I already held the contract they were all pretending to fight for. They just hadn't read the fine print yet. I made my way past the reception desk without a word, heels clicking on polished tile heart, steady. The security guard gave me a nod. I returned it. He was the only one in that building who had ever remembered my name without looking at my badge. I stepped into the elevator and pressed L for lobby. As the doors closed, I looked at my reflection in the mirrored panel. They thought I was dead weight, but soon they'd realize I was the anchor holding their world in place. The first time I noticed it, it was small. A single bullet point from my internal memo appeared verbatim on Julian's slide deck during a pitch to upper management. He didn't credit me. No one asked where it came from. It was praised as insightful and fresh. I was sitting 3 seats away, invisible. At Aurelius, invisibility didn't mean absence. It meant being expected to be present, but not heard, productive, but not credited. The Ivy adjacent hires those with legacy connections or fathers on advisory boards rose like cream. I remained somewhere just above sediment, holding everything together, but never seen for what I was. My first year, I doubled the firm's projected returns on a volatile mid-cap portfolio. My review called me detail-oriented and reliable. Julian, who had once misspelled EBITDA in a client memo, was called visionary. He got the promotion. I got his spreadsheets to clean up. Meetings blurred into a theater of performance. The same people spoke. The same voices dominated. I brought models, risk sheets, trend forecasts, often pulled together at 1:30 in the morning, and watched them be reshaped into someone else's narrative by noon. "We appreciate your support," they'd say, handing me coffee orders while I corrected their math. Eventually, I stopped trying to raise my hand. Being loud didn't come naturally. What did come naturally was observation. I paid attention. Who leaned which way when the managing partner spoke? Who took notes and who took credit? Who laughed too quickly? Who always said, "we," when it was clearly someone else's work? I learned how power moved not in the reports but in the silences between words. I stayed quiet, not because I lacked courage, but because noise isn't the same as strength. I learned the value of patience in a room full of ambition. Julian didn't see me then. None of them did. That was their first mistake. Their second was assuming I wasn't building something while they were busy chasing recognition. I didn't start Orilight Holdings out of revenge. Not at first. It began on a cold February night 2 years into my tenure at Aurelius, after yet another quarterly review, where my consistency was praised and my raise was politely deferred. I went to visit my godmother, Mireille, a retired tax attorney who once handled restructuring for Fortune 500 companies, like she was folding laundry. We sat at her kitchen table, the air thick with chamomile and unspoken frustration. She listened, not interrupting once. Then, with that dry calm of someone who had seen too many men get away with too much, she asked a question that rearranged everything. Why are you letting them keep all the upside of your work? That night, she walked me through the bones of private equity. Holding structures, tax shields, quiet capital. The idea that influence didn't require noise, it required infrastructure. I didn't sleep. I sketched. By the end of the month, Aurelight Holdings was born. Nothing flashy. A name that looked like it belonged to a family trust in Connecticut. Quiet on paper, invisible in meetings, just the way I needed it. I funneled everything I could into it. My savings, my tax returns. I cut my wardrobe budget in half, took a roommate I didn't need, said no to things I couldn't afford to begin with. But I kept investing slowly, deliberately in the sectors. Aurelius rolled their eyes at green infrastructure, climate AI, female-founded battery labs. That's how I found Velmont Technologies. It was buried inside a convoluted IP tangle and a board full of has-beens, but the patents, specifically their polymer solar film, were 2 years ahead of anything in the domestic market. No one at Aurelius even opened their deck. I did. I stayed up 3 nights in a row breaking it down. I bought my first tranche quietly, just 3.8%. Enough to monitor, enough to matter. They were laughing about a pitch meeting that same week. Julian was bragging about a deal he barely understood. I was running cash flow projections from a tablet under the table. The math said Velmont had 12 months before someone noticed their worth. It turned out I noticed first. 2 weeks after Velmont was officially absorbed into Arginvest's holdings, I received an internal memo assigning me to the support team on the account. A thinly veiled punishment masked as an opportunity. The language was polite, almost generous. Given your familiarity with their industry, we'd love your help with documentation. Julian will lead the client-facing strategy. Of course he would. Julian had never read a patent in full. He thought IP was something the legal team existed to boil down. But he could charm a room and sell a line, and that, at Aurelius, was all that really mattered. I said nothing. I attended the internal briefings. I watched him outline a pitch that centered on asset stripping Velmont's most valuable divisions, selling off its R&D, licensing its tech overseas for fast bloated fees. It was clean, profitable, devastating. It would kill the company within a year. That night, I stayed until after midnight compiling a full counter-analysis, a sustainable path. Keep Velmont intact, restructure the board, inject capital into scaling production. I mapped it out across 8 quarters. It retained over 80% of the jobs Julian's strategy would erase. It doubled long-term value. I sent it to the senior partners and Julian before I left the office. I didn't expect praise, but I expected anyone to read it. The next morning, I was called into HR. They used the phrase alignment reassessment, a placeholder for what was really happening. Effective immediately, you'll be on administrative leave for performance evaluation. They didn't say it, but I could feel it like cold air rushing into a warm room. This was the beginning of the end. They were cutting me out before I could cause more friction. I nodded, signed the form, and gathered the personal items from my desk without protest. The succulent I kept by the window had turned dry and brittle. No one had watered it. They thought they were silencing me. But what they really gave me was the one thing I'd never had at Aurelius. Time uninterrupted, unobserved, and mine alone. By the time HR finalized the paperwork on my leave, I was already making calls. Not desperate ones, strategic ones. I had a list curated over years, kept off company servers, encrypted and printed once in hard copy. I started with Professor Cardell from grad school, who now ran a climate tech incubator. Then Elena Park, who'd launched her own fund focused on underrepresented founders. 3 calls later, I was speaking with the managing partner of an angel syndicate I had cold pitched a year ago. Everyone remembered me, not because I was loud, but because I'd been right, again and again. I didn't ask for favors. I presented Velmont's new trajectory, its IP potential, the unlocked efficiencies, the long-term path that Julian had tossed out like trash. I showed the model I'd submitted to Aurelius, and I showed what I'd done to improve it. By the end of the first week, I had soft commitments from 3 institutions and 5 individuals. By day 9, the capital was secured, quietly, legally, and through Auralite Holdings, the entity no one at Aurelius had ever taken seriously because they never bothered to ask what I did with my weekends. We moved quickly. Velmont's founder had been eager to exit for over a year. Their board was fractious and exhausted. All it took was the right offer and the right conditions, none of which included Julian's slash-and-burn proposal. I installed a leaner executive team, brought in operations experts from my own network, and revived the R&D unit with full autonomy. We activated the long-term tech investment strategy, the exact one I had outlined before being shoved aside. Velmont responded like dry ground soaking in rain. Then I started quietly reviewing every third-party agreement, advisory contracts, vendor relationships, outside consultants, and one by one, anything tied to Aurelius went under pause or redirection. No one there had yet noticed the shift. Not fully, but they would, because the client they'd dismissed as my optics assignment was no longer just a client. It was the door through which I now held the key, and they were still reaching for the knob. The invitation came in the form of an internal memo at Aurelius, forwarded through 3 assistants, and marked with the kind of urgency that made people sweat. Arginvest, under its newly restructured leadership, was inviting select firms to pitch for an exclusive advisory role. The final presentation would take place over a private dinner at Viridian, the most exclusive restaurant in the district. I had been there once before alone for lunch. The maitre d' had asked me gently but firmly if I was waiting for someone. I wasn't. I'd come after being told I wasn't client-facing enough to attend a pitch dinner held there by my own firm. Now the table would be mine. The new board at Arginvest, my board had made one special request in their RSVP that Thalia Vellner be included in the Aurelius delegation. Julian called me 2 days later. His voice was coated in synthetic warmth. Thalia, we may have been a little hasty. There's interest in having you at the dinner. From the client specifically. We'd love to welcome you back just for this event. Maybe even revisit your status. I let a pause stretch long enough for him to question himself. Of course, I said finally, I'd be happy to attend. The lie was effortless. He didn't know that Arginvest's CEO, Cassandra, had already briefed me on the full guest list. He didn't know that 2 of Auralite's senior partners would be sitting in as observers listed only by first name and generic titles. He didn't know the wine list had been curated with my input. What he did know, what he assumed, was that I must be desperate, that this was a chance to reclaim relevance after my so-called fall. I accepted the dinner invitation not to prove him wrong, but to watch him discover it on his own. The suits at Aurelius would bring their pitch decks and recycled language. I would bring the one thing they'd always underestimated: quiet ownership. And this time, when I walked through those glass doors, no one would ask if I was waiting for someone. The dining room at Viridian hummed with muted clinks of glass and polished silver. The table was dressed for formality linen, folded like armor candlelight, bouncing off crystal. I sat at the far end, my name card printed without a title, while Julian held court with practiced confidence. He spoke of growth targets and scalable value pathways. EMTT from strategy chimed in about synergistic frameworks, the same empty language they'd used for years. It hadn't evolved, they just recycled it with better fonts. Then Cassandra, Arginvest's CEO, cleared her throat with subtle purpose. Before we begin the formal presentation, she said lightly, our team had a question. We came across an internal strategy document in the Keystone Sorry Aurelius server. It proposed an alternative path for Velmont. It was detailed and accurate. The table quieted. It was authored by a Thalia Vellner. She continued glancing down the table toward me. We were curious. What was your role on that account again? Julian's smile faltered. She provided support, he said quickly. Basic research, preliminary modeling. The document wasn't reflective of our final stance. Cassandra nodded slowly. Interesting, because the recommendations align precisely with the direction we've since adopted with great success. Then she turned fully to me. Thalia, if I may, what is your current relationship to Velmont? I folded my napkin slowly and placed it beside my plate. I lead the investment group that acquired Velmont's parent company last quarter. A glass tipped, water bled across printed slides, a fork slipped to the floor. Julian opened his mouth, then closed it again. That's impossible, someone muttered. It wasn't, I said calmly. It just required vision, the kind you once told me I lacked. Across the table, EMTT stared at his untouched entree. Cassandra smiled like she already knew this moment was coming. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. I had already changed the game. Now it was time to decide who still deserved a seat at the table. I let the silence linger. Let the reality settle into every crease of their tailored suits and every drop of spilled water soaking Julian's papers. No one reached to clean it up. As part of the acquisition, I said evenly, we're reviewing all consulting relationships, including Aurelius's contract. Julian bristled. His voice rose brittle with disbelief. You're dismantling years of collaboration over a personal grudge. No, I replied. I'm correcting the consequences of poor strategy. Your proposed liquidation plan would have eliminated over 400 jobs and buried a technology pipeline that's now driving quarter-over-quarter growth. Across the table, I caught the eye of Devin Kim, an analyst who'd spent 3 years cleaning Julian's data models before they were passed off as original work. He'd once left a post-it on my desk after I corrected a formula in his projections. You saved my job today. Devin, I said your work has always been thorough and honest. We're building an internal team at Velmont. I'd like you to be part of it. He looked stunned. I turned next to Clarice Nyong'o. Quiet, brilliant, always 3 steps ahead, but never invited to speak at client meetings. I remembered her staying late to rebuild a deck Julian destroyed by changing one variable. Clarice, we could use someone with your foresight. If you're interested, there's a place for you, too. They both nodded, hesitant but hopeful. Julian scoffed. You're poaching junior staff out of spite. I'm offering opportunity based on merit, I said. The same thing I was never given here. Talent shouldn't be wasted just because it's quiet. He leaned back, jaw tight, still trying to recalibrate the power dynamic he no longer controlled. This is revenge. No, this is responsibility. I glanced around the table, and for the first time, they all looked at me, not through me. No one interrupted. No one condescended. They understood now I hadn't been waiting for permission. I had been preparing for authority, and I wasn't finished yet. By Monday morning, the headlines were already circling. Aurelius loses major client after leadership misstep. Their stock dipped 5% by market close. Internal chatter leaked to finance blogs. No one mentioned my name, but I was everywhere in the silence between the words. Julian called twice, left a voicemail offering a pathway to mutual benefit. I didn't respond. I had no interest in collaborating with someone who only saw value when it wore a suit and echoed his own voice back at him. Instead, I spent the afternoon where I should have been years ago inside the Argonvest Research Lab, walking through workstations with engineers who were rebuilding the future one prototype at a time. They showed me their progress with a kind of nervous pride. I stayed longer than planned. I asked questions no one from Aurelius had ever bothered to ask. The room buzzed with something I'd missed for too long, curiosity without hierarchy. That evening, I returned to my office. Not the shared cubicle I used to occupy under buzzing fluorescent lights, but a glass-walled suite at Velmont's headquarters. My desk was clean-centered, facing the skyline. On the far shelf sat a row of intern folders. At the top was one labeled Harper Lynn. She knocked timidly before entering. Harper was barely 23, quick, meticulous, introverted. She rarely spoke in meetings, but when she did, the room shifted. She reminded me of who I used to be before the silence became habit. I handed her a folder. This was the strategy document I submitted to Aurelius. They buried it. She opened it slowly, eyes scanning the pages. "You want me to study it?" "No," I said. "I want you to build something better." Her eyes flicked up wide and unsure, but behind them I saw fire. "Start here," I added. "Then write your own version. One day someone will dismiss you too. Be ready." She nodded, and in that small gesture, something shifted in me, something that had waited too long to bloom. The future didn't need my permission to arrive. It just needed a door left open. A year passed, and the noise faded. Velmont, once a footnote in underfunded innovation, was now a leader in modular solar integration. We expanded into 3 new markets, signed partnerships that Aurelius had once deemed too risky, and closed our 4th consecutive quarter of double-digit growth. The internal culture had changed too. People spoke up. Meetings ended with ideas, not hierarchy. We lost some along the way, those too attached to how things used to work, but we kept the ones who believed better was possible. That was enough. Aurelius lost 3 major clients within 8 months. Their leadership team reshuffled. Julian resigned, citing personal realignment. Industry whispers said he tried to launch a boutique firm, but doors didn't open the way they used to. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. My name appeared on the cover of Green Finance today, above a headline that read, "The Quiet Architect of Change." They asked for interviews, op-eds, keynote speeches. I declined most of them. Let the narrative build itself. I had other things to do. One of those things was watering a plant. It sat in the corner of my office now beneath the wide windows that overlooked the lake. The same small pot they'd boxed up with my belongings at Aurelius. The leaves had been brittle, then barely clinging to green, but I took it anyway, roots and all. I watched it every day as I worked. It didn't ask for attention, it just needed light, time, and space. I held the watering can over it, letting the soil soak slowly. The leaves had thickened, reached outward. The plant hadn't survived because I saved it. It had survived because I finally gave it room to grow. And in that quiet, ordinary moment, I understood the truth. I had waited years to say out loud, revenge was never the goal. I didn't need them to lose. I just needed space to win.